Good evening, everybody. It's William again here with What in the World. We've taken a little hiatus. We haven't had nearly as many regular What in the World episodes on a very regular basis because of the content we got on the channel is just loaded at this point. But we thought we'd come back with a bang tonight. Our special guest tonight is a gentleman named Steve Ladd. We're fixing to bring him on. If you don't know who Steve Ladd is, before we leave tonight, you're definitely going to know who he is. So let's bring him on this time.
Hey, man.
Steve Ladd, superstar.
Well, I'm
one of the greatest voices in Southern or just gospel music. I don't want to say Southern gospel. I want to regionalize you in gospel music. We're talking Andre Crouch. We're talking Guy Penrod. We're talking David Phelps. I mean, those are some heavy hitters, and Steve Ladd ranks above all of them.
No, you're a little mistaken, man. I rank below them. They are incredible. But I've been blessed to sing for most of my life for a living, and so. But that's a big compliment. Thank you.
I wanted to bring you in hard, and let's see how far we could go with it. I thought you'd start shaking your head eventually and agree with me. So
no, because people are going to be watching this, and
and they're like, "That ain't the Steve Ladd." All right, so. Like I said, for those watching that have no idea who Steve Ladd is, let's go back and find out who Steve Ladd is. Okay. Steve Ladd originally started this journey in the state of Ohio. See, I thought this whole time I was going to be talking to a Southern boy. I saw that 256 area code. I said, man, Birmingham, Alabama, this guy's going to be a good old country boy, but he's a Northerner of all things.
I'm a Reformed Yankee.
A Reformed Yankee. All right. So Let's go back until let's start it this way. You've been singing, you said, for a large majority of your life. So when did one day, when you were ever how old, you said, you know what, I'm pretty good at this singing thing. I think I could make I won't say a career, but I might could do a lot with it. When was that? Like, how old are you? Like, what was the first talent competition that you just destroyed everybody and you said, that's what I'm going to do?
I don't have a story like that. My dad, from Dayton, Ohio originally, my dad got saved, got called into the ministry, and was an evangelist. And he was a Pentecostal tent revival preacher. And so I'm the youngest of my siblings. We did all the music in my dad's revivals. Mom and dad could sing, but they sang no harmony. They played no instruments. And so they prayed their children will become musical. And one by one, we learned how to do that. And so I started singing with my family around 5 or 6 years old, and stayed there with my family until I was 18. One by one, I'm the youngest. So, the older kids got jobs and went to college and got married. And so the family stopped traveling. I was the last one. Dad continued to preach, not tent revivals, but continued to evangelize. And I, at 18 years old, I'll go back a little bit. At 12, we moved to West Virginia, and I lived in West Virginia for several years. And at 18, I swore to myself before I turned 18 that I was going to move down south because that's where the quartets were, and that's what I wanted to be, a tenor in the quartets. So at 18, I left the family, moved to North Carolina. And at 19, I started full-time with my first ever group, the Anchormen. And they had several big hit songs and traveled full-time. And matter of fact, Jeff Chapman, who sings bass with Gold City now, was the bass singer when I first joined the Anchormen. So they've had incredible talent throughout the years. And so that was my first group. I stayed there about 9 years. And in 2004, my dream come true. Growing up, my favorite group was Gold City. That's all I wanted to listen to. I studied Brian Free's voice and their music, and we had opened up. The Anchorman have done concerts with them and opened for them several times, and so I had a little bit of a relationship with those guys. But in 2004, the tenor position came open, and I called and got a tryout, and I got the job, and so that was a dream come true, and I stayed there. Little over 5 years, and in 2009 I left and started a solo career. Toured with Michael English for 2 years and opened for him, and did a lot of cool things. I was blessed to be asked by the Stamps Quartet, who backed up Elvis in the 70s, to be a part of an Alan Jackson recording, the Precious Memories Volume 2, that he wanted the stamps on there. And at the time, they didn't have a tenor singer. And so Ed Enoch, one of the original members, called me and said, hey, would you like to be a part of this? So that was a cool thing. And then in 18, I joined a group called the Old Pass. It started out, I was still solo. That's what kind of lured me to that. I could still be solo and then do several dates with a quartet, and have kind of the best of both worlds. And then we had some radio success, had a #1 song that I was featured on. And so the group decided to go full time. And so I gave up solo for about 5 years. And so they've changed their name to Anthem Edition, and they've just had a new album come out. They're doing great. But about October of last year, I left and just felt the call to just step back out on my own and travel. My wife goes with me everywhere I go. She runs my sound. She's a rock star. She really is. She sings a couple songs with me. And so for the last year and a few months, I've been back solo, and I'm having a ball.
So you said earlier, and I don't remember if we had hit record at this point when we had this conversation or not. You said you were 40. You told me you were 48 years old.
Oh, yeah.
So you had been performing. You had been on a stage, just belting out this music for 43 years.
Yeah. Professionally.
With no real gap. I mean, I didn't hear a whole lot of gap in all that. You just.
No, I left my family. I worked when I was still with my family before I turned 18. I worked I delivered pizzas for about a year. Okay. And I left and moved to North Carolina. And that period before I joined the Anchorman, I worked at a music store for about 7-8 months, and then got the call to join the Anchorman. And so professionally, since I was 19, so almost 30 years now, this is all I've done. I haven't had to do anything else. So God's been good. So
30 years. Yeah. Yeah. That's crazy.
Now,
I know before we started, I know I brought this up before we got started about my real introduction to what we call Southern gospel music, because when you're in the deep South, it's Southern gospel music. It's just not gospel music; it's Southern gospel. We're like Southern rock. We put an adjective on everything down here. So I grew up every Sunday morning. I was raised Methodist. I married Baptist. My wife and I are now non-denominational. We're gonna try it all out. But I grew up every Sunday morning getting ready to go to church, hearing the Florida boys just belting it out on the television, on whatever local channel it was. You said you knew about the Jubilee, of course, from Ohio. You shocked me when you said that y'all got a lot of that stuff up there and a lot of Southern gospel influence up there.
Man,
so that was.
Yeah, I remember. Now I was a little later. They were playing some reruns, like certain states. Some things would play the older Jubilee, so I've seen them, but I wasn't around to see it live like you were. But we had a great DJ, Norm Livingston. He was a promoter, pastor, and DJ, had a radio station. The radio station's still there in Dayton, Ohio. But he brought the Gold City, the Cathedrals, the Hensons, the Paynes, the Spears, all those groups. And so I remember going to the Dayton Memorial Hall and seeing all those groups. And of course, we got the Singing News magazine. And so it was Southern gospel was alive and still is alive and well in Ohio.
Right. Yeah, you and I talked about that young couple. My mother's a big fan of that group Redeemed, which is from that area where he originated. I'm not sure if they're from Ohio, but they're from that area that you came from. So they're super talented young men.
Incredible.
But that's they just carrying the torch. They probably heard Steve Ladd belting it out, when they were 7 or 8 years old, and said, "Man, I want to do that."
They might have. They're young enough. I probably was singing with Gold City at the time, and they were young. And
superstar. He doesn't want to use that label, superstar.
No, man. There's only one superstar, and that's
I know. It's amazing. So, speaking of, let's talk about that just a second. Your faith walk, your walk with Christ. You said you're a PK, which you were trouble from day one. If you're a PK, that's You know, my grandfather was a pastor, so I guess I was so good. I was trouble as a grandchild. So what was it like growing up as a preacher's kid?
It was different. We traveled a lot, so I remember being real young and going to public school for a little while. Then we were homeschooled because we got real busy, and then back to public school for a year, and then homeschooled again. So my childhood like that was a little sporadic. But we were always on the road, and when we weren't, if there was a period of time that that the family didn't go, then we were back in public school. So it was a little confusing childhood, but I loved it. Growing up, I was introduced to the word, from the time I was born. My dad was already in church and getting ready to start preaching. He'd just been called to preach. And so he, the word was TBN. I mean, just Christian TV was on in our home. We were always in church. If there was a Wednesday, Tuesday, Thursday service in our area, Dad would load up the family. We would go and sometimes sing at the service. And so I knew at a young age about God and knew what I should be. But every child, when they're around that, you get saved as a real young child. But then the older you get, you realize a lot more about how the severity of that situation and the seriousness of it. And so I rededicated my life when I was a teenager and made sure I got it right and got baptized. And so I say I've been saved my whole life. It feels like it,
Right.
I was raised in a Christian home, went to church every time the doors were open. So I knew about it, and that was just normal to me. But as I got a little older, and you kind of get away from that age of accountability or move into the age of accountability,
right.
You realize that, hey, I don't know. And so I made sure that was taken care of when I was a teenager. And it's a daily thing, that I've not lived a perfect life by no means. So it's kind of like you die daily to self.
Right.
Continue drawing.
Never had that walk away moment like where you
have. No, I mean, I've strayed personally in things before, but I've never been like, I don't need that. I don't believe in that. I'm gonna do my own thing for a while. Never. I've always been in ministry. Like I said, I left my family, moved to North Carolina, was in ministry with them, left my family, and then a year later was in ministry again with the Anchorman. And then since then, this is all I've done. So I have been in ministry my whole life, and I've never, and I'm not one that lives a double standard and is a hypocrite, and that's just my job. I'll act the way they need me to act in front of them, but I'm gonna live. Never had that mentality. But man, I'm human. I've failed. I've struggled with things, like we all have. But I've never had that thing. Never once in my life have I thought, I don't believe this. I don't believe in this. I'm gonna do my own thing. Never. Now, as humans do, there are times I'm like, is it what I've been taught my whole life? Is you kind of ask God, guys, is this real? I mean, when things happen in your life or things aren't going the right, and you see the hypocrisy that can be in a lot of it, and so God, is this even real? I have had questions like that to God. But he always has shown me in his own way, yes, it's real. And man, my dad taught me a long time ago, he said, if all this is make believe and it's not real, then I've really lost nothing. I've lived a decent life. But what if, and then I turn away from it? What if it is real? And so I have chosen to believe that it is real and that it's a daily walk. And when we stumble and fall, we have an advocate with the Father through Christ Jesus because of what he did at Calvary.
All right. So since you've been performing literally, essentially since you were 5 years old, a question was submitted to be asked, and I'm going to read it exactly like it was because I'm going to call a couple of artist names in it. I'm not attacking these artists. This is how the question was asked. Okay. The question is, Steve, with all the performing that you've been doing throughout all these years, did you ever have a moment when you felt like or wanted to do like either Amy Grant or Lauren Daigle recently, where you distanced yourself from the label of a Christian or gospel artist?
That's a good question, and I can't speak to Lauren Daigle's heart or Amy Grant's heart. I've actually performed with Amy Grant in Nashville, and but I still don't know the condition of her heart.
Right. Well, that's you both realize the reason those two names were listed is because of the public perception.
Yes, no, and what has been said, I think Lauren said in an interview one time, she doesn't necessarily want to be known as a Christian artist. I've always loved gospel music, Southern gospel music, contemporary country gospel. I love Black gospel music, all forms of gospel music, and I don't think if by some crazy whim a song of mine was to pick up and take off in a different genre, and maybe I get some recognition outside of the world of gospel music. Man, I just have too much conviction in my heart not to let people know that, hey, I'm a Christian artist. I know a lot of country singers and people who are Christians. They're not in the Christian music world, but they're still dedicated, full-fledged Christians. And I kind of think that's what Lauren Daigle was getting at. Maybe, I don't know, was that I want my music heard around the world. I don't want it just boxed into one little section.
You felt like staying labeled was going to limit her reach.
Probably. And hey, that's for her to answer to God and her to answer.
Right. I see what you're saying.
Yeah, but I've sang on stage with the Oak Ridge Boys when I was with Gold City, and we did a big show, and sang Elvira with them, and I loved it, and it was fun. But man, I believe God has given me the talent and the gift of what I do to honor Him. Now, that doesn't mean I can't sing a country song, a kind of a faith-filled country song or something that's not about drinking and cheating on your wife. That doesn't mean I couldn't do a different genre of music, but I would never say, hey, I'm not a Christian artist.
Yeah. But you've never, I guess a little side question would be, is you've never even thought about venturing into secular music?
No, everyone looks at the crowds, and people look at the money you can make outside of gospel music, and there's that, man, wonder what it would be like, but I've never tried to venture out. This is all I've done. And at 48 years old, I'm not a young, new, big thing coming on the scene, and so I've chosen to just stay in my lane. Now I'm in Southern gospel, but some of my music doesn't fit Southern gospel. I guess you would say it's progressive or a little country, a little Black on. So I've not just stayed right in the vein of Southern gospel music, but I've never felt that a door was open for that, and I think there's a reason. Maybe if I was to walk into that arena, maybe I would stumble, or maybe something would happen to cause me to walk something, and so I think maybe God was keeping me safe from that.
Yeah, everybody can't be Elvis Presley. He's the king of rock and roll, but his biggest hits from a Billboard standpoint were gospel stuff. So
he never won a Grammy for anything but his gospel.
Yeah. So that's, if I like I said, the only reason I put those two names in is because it was presented that way. No, I know. Because they were citing them. For example, I was a huge Amy Grant fan growing up. A huge Amy Grant fan. Yeah. And listen, she's just like everybody else. She made decisions that I know to this moment she still regrets, but she still has to live with them. Yeah. And then she did, in a way, because I was really new into my faith and new into contemporary Christian music is what they're calling it then. I loved her stuff, but I also understood when she jumped ship, she was at that time in her life, she did it for a couple of reasons. She did it, one, because she saw that it could be a little bit more lucrative, and two, she needed to distance herself because of some decisions she had made. She needed to, get a little space, I guess. But I don't condemn either one of these young ladies. Matter of fact, I've never been a huge Lauren Daigle fan. I mean, I know who she is. I've heard her music. I'm what is it? Megan Woods, I think the young lady's name now. Megan Woods sounds like, I thought she was Lauren Daigle the first time I heard her music on K-Love. So that was crazy how much she sounded like her. Nobody's got the Steve Ladd down yet. I haven't heard another Steve Ladd. You know, like a AI has not duplicated you yet. So not yet. They're working on it though. They're working on it.
I'm sure they're working on everybody's voice.
All right, so the Anchorman, you know, you kind of helped. You didn't help. They were around before you started with them. You helped them get to a certain level, and then you got the dream job. You said you got a chance to go to Gold City. How many actual albums did you guys make when you were actually with them?
With Gold City, I believe I made 5 albums with them. 5 albums. There was a Christmas. First Class was the name of the album, my first album. Then there was Heaven. Then there was, oh Lord. My last album was the album that had For the Sake of My Heart and What Children Believe. A Revival had Preached the Word, and then a Christmas album. So I made 5 albums with the group.
All right, there's a collection of questions about Gold City that if I could just, I'm going to ask them to you. All right, first of all, while performing with Gold City, what was the most difficult song that you felt you had to perform?
Oh, well, one of the just a taxing song on me was In Time, On Time, Every Time. Loved the song. Jay Perrick was the original singer of that song on the album, and loved it. It just stayed at the top, you know, on the choruses, and then it changed keys. Then it changed keys again. So and I led it, so it was just really, really high. When He Calls, I'll Fly Away, at the end, Jay would go up and hit that real high note. And I remember one night doing that, hitting that high falsetto note. And Tim Riley, after the concert that night on the bus, he said, yeah, I noticed what you did on when he calls. And I said, yes, sir. And he said, you don't need to do that. And
don't be too good. Don't be too good.
No. But and I thought at first, it was just I didn't hit it good, and he didn't like how I sounded. Just was that, and then he said that was Jay's thing. He said you just need to create your own.
Don't do too much. Stay in your lane. That was the original "stay in your lane" moment right there.
He said, I want you to do your own thing. That was Jay's deal. Because Jay was known, his dad sang with the Kingsmen and went and did all those high things at the end. And of course, Jay could do that. And so Jay did that. That was kind of his signature on songs like that. And so at first I was like, I don't know how to take it. But then I got it. And Doug Riley was also another one, Doug and Danny. Doug would sit in the back lounge every once in a while. And he said, I just can't wait to hear Steve Ladd. Because with the Anchorman, growing up a Brian Free Gold City, that era of Gold City fan, I patterned my voice after Brian Free, and I did sound very similar to him, and that might have helped me get the job with Gold City, and loved it. And they were like, oh, it brings us back to the older Gold City sound. But Brian had his thing. Jay had his thing. And at the time when Doug told me that, I hadn't found my voice as far as instead of being a sound alike to someone. And I didn't understand when he said, I can't wait to hear Steve sing. And I'm like, I sang tonight, you know, where were you at? But
find your own voice.
Yeah. And I got that. And it wasn't until the Revival album that Michael English produced. That's where I got to know Michael and Michael Sykes. They stopped the recording. I did Preach the Word one time through, and I was the only one of the group there at the studio at that time. And Michael English said, man, he said, Brian Free is great. He said, but when people hear this, do you want them to think, is that Brian's new song? Is that Brian Free Insurance's new single? And he said, man, just sing like you've always wanted to sing and create your style. And I got it. It flipped in my head. I got it and started from that album. You can tell a difference from all my other recordings, my family with the Anchorman, the recordings before that with Gold City until then. And then you can hear I've created my own style as far as I'm singing how I should sing, and so I got it. When I don't want people to just think he's a Brian Free wannabe, or he's this or he's that. I want people to say, oh, that's Steve, and so that was a very valuable lesson. And I didn't get it at first when Doug and Tim were telling me that, but I eventually, thank God, got it, and just decided to be my own artist, have my own style.
During that era, the Gold City era, because that's, you even admitted this before we get started recording. That was kind of, I'm not going to say it was the pinnacle at that time of your career. I mean, you've reached new heights now as a solo artist, but when was that aha moment? Like, was it one night on stage you were singing and you looked out across the crowd and go, oh my God, this is it.
I remember when that really set in was my first weekend out with Gold City. We were in Texas, and to stand on stage, I was nervous, and just real green. Even though I'd done it for 9 years professionally with the Anchorman, this was a different level, and required more, mind and vocal and being on it every night on every song, no matter what's going on in your mind, you got to nail it. And it was like the first night I'm standing there, we're singing Midnight Cry, and Tim Riley's on he was just bottom that last note, and I'm like, I'm on stage with the Gold City that I grew up fantasizing about being with one day, and there's Tim Riley hitting that lowest note I've heard him sing, and there's Jonathan, Danny, and the band of gold behind us. I will forever remember that night, and just how I felt walking, being on that stage. Now afterwards I was a nervous wreck because I didn't think I did good, and there's fear of if I continue not to do good, are they going to let me go? And but they were great guys, still are great guys, and that I remember that vividly as the big aha, man, this is incredible, and after that we sang for Jerry Falwell. Before he passed away, he had heard Preach the Word, that I was featured on, and wanted us to sing it on a Sunday morning before he preached there at Thomas Road, and that was a cool thing. I know he's controversial, but he's a legendary name, and
he's one of the most well-known pastors that ever lived. That's for sure. Regardless of the press and the media can do a lot of things for a lot of people.
Right, but it was a big deal for me.
Big deal, yeah. Especially when you would have had that opportunity to perform, that would have been a huge deal.
Yeah, and there's just so many things that happened during my time with Gold City, that was just a gift from God, man. I grew up poor, man. My dad had a good job at General Motors before he got saved, and in Dayton, Ohio, and was on his way to retire. One day retiring with benefits, a pension, and all this. God saved him, called him to preach, and called him to evangelize, and he walked away from that and just took his family on the road. And there were a lot of lean times, man. I mean, we didn't have a lot. We had each other, and we had our music and love, but there was a lot of lean times. So growing up, dreaming about being on stage with Gold City, and I thought they were celebrities. They were to me, and just to see how God took a dream from a kid out of Dayton, Ohio, and allowed me to do things that I've done. It's been incredible.
All right, we got a bundle of nerves question here. You rate these. You need to rank these bundle of nerves.
Okay.
All right, let's see. It's first time you ever stepped on stage to perform, the audition for Gold City, and the first time you performed live with Gold City. How would you rate those three? From most nervous to, I think I'm going to be okay.
So
probably none of those.
The first time I ever stepped on stage was I was on stage, like I said, in my dad's revivals since 4, 5, 6 years old. But I remember vividly, I was around 5 or 6, and I told my dad that I wanted to sing a song that night during a revival. He said, okay, we'll just get with your sister and y'all pick a song and we'll have you do it. And I said, no, I want to sing the invitation song. at that then, and back then I called it the altar call song. I said I want to sing altar call.
That's a
And
bold move at 6 years old.
yes, and I've often said that I knew that was the most important part of the service. I knew, and something drew me to that part. That's I wanted to be a part of that part of the service. And Dad said okay, and so I remember standing behind the pulpit. I was very short. No one could see me. I was very shy. And so no one could see me. And here's this little voice was coming out of the speakers, and no one could see me. I was standing behind the pulpit. I was very nervous. But then I did that from then on in the invitation. Dad had me kind of to be a part of that time in the service. And I'll just break it down how I tried out for Gold City. I got the invite to come and try out. The anchormen were singing at Thomas Road, not for the church and not for Falwell. It was a television thing that we were taping there at Thomas Road in their television studios on a Sunday afternoon, and the group was based out of Eastern North Carolina. So I knew Monday morning I had to be trying out for Gold City. So I didn't get on the road from Eastern North Carolina till 9:00 at night to head to Alabama to be ready to rehearse or try out the next morning. And it was about a 7-8 hour drive. And so I drove all night long. It got in at about 5:00 in the morning and laid down for a couple hours. And I'm the type of person, if I don't get enough rest, my voice suffers. And so I was nervous, just knowing I've ruined my chance. I should have just waited and put it back to a different time, but I was worried they'd find somebody in that time and hire them. So I went over there, and as soon as I was pulling into their offices and recording studios driveway, there was a car coming out of the driveway. And I recognized the guy driving. It was a guy that sang in a group in North Carolina, a different group. And so I was like, man, he probably got the job, because he's a good singer, and I'd been around him a time or two. So I went down, pulled in the parking lot, got into and there was 3 other guys waiting to try out in the waiting room. But I was on time, and so they called me right on back. And so I went in and tried out in their little studio, and Channing Ellington was playing the little keyboard there, and we just sang several different songs. And then Danny said, hey, are you in a big hurry to go back to North Carolina? I said, well, not necessarily. He said, we've got more people to try out, but I want you to come back this evening, and I want you to record a song. They already had my first album. They already had it recorded. Jay had already recorded it, but then left the group. So they held the recording release until they got a new singer. And I was going to, whoever they got was going to replace all the tenor parts on the album. So he said, I want you to come back and put you on this recording just to see what it sounds like on a recording. And so I watched a movie that afternoon at the mall, and then came back and recorded that. And man, I burnt that CD. He burnt me a CD, and I probably wore that CD out listening to it on a 7-hour drive home that evening. And so I got it just a couple of days later. I got a call and said I got the job. And so I was nervous, but I think what made me the most nervous was worrying if my voice was going to hold up, because I drove all night after singing all weekend with the Anchorman, and then drove all night to go be there and without any sleep. But God, man, I've realized if it's God's will, that He'll make a way. If it's His will, He's going to make it happen. And so and the nervousness with being on stage, probably the first time at National Quartet Convention, walking on stage with Gold City for the first time, because it was a big deal. Jay had been there 11 years and had won favorite tenor 3 or 4 or 5 times. Been featured on numerous #1 songs. So everybody was a Jay fan. That era of Gold City was just really popular. And then here's this new guy. Let's see what he's going to sound like. And so that was... I was a nervous wreck. But there's a video on YouTube of Gold City, God Handled It All, live at NQC. And the version that I'm on, that was my first night walking on stage with Gold City. And man, I hit that high note, and I'm so proud of it, because it'll live on forever. It's on YouTube. And I knew after that, I was like, it's going to be okay. And it was.
Yeah. just couldn't breathe and swallowing your tongue. Couldn't.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
bad. I understand.
yep.
So, I mean, I would expect you're sort of like Steve Young replacing Joe Montana. It's a scary thought. I understand that.
Oh, yep.
Yeah.
Any of the Journey singers replacing Steve Perry, you know.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Pineda. I forgot
Yeah.
about the Pineda guy who sounds just like him. It's funny that you made that statement that you were trying to mirror your predecessors' tone and voice and pitch and range and all that kind of stuff. And you really didn't have to. They
No.
finally tell you, man, just be you. Just be Steve Ladd. Superstar Steve Ladd.
Well, I don't know. They didn't use that name, Superstar.
Well, I'm just saying, well, they probably didn't. They didn't want to build you up too fast. You know.
But
You
I'm
got
thankful for people, because you know, for them doing that, and I'll be forever indebted. Michael English is a great friend of mine, and I travel with him. He produced an album of mine. We're good friends, but I'm indebted for him to stop the recording of Preach the Word, the original one. We sang it one time, and they were in the control room talking. I could see him. I was like, oh, it's probably they're not happy with this or whatever. And then he just came back, and I'm thankful that he said that, because I would still probably be just a Brian Free, not imitator, because I still had my own voice, but that's just it was very similar to Brian Free's style, which I love Brian Free. That was a big compliment when people told me, man, you remind me of Brian Free's voice. That was one of my biggest compliments ever. So I've filled in for Brian twice since I've left the group, and so I love Brian Free, but to know that people know my voice now, and that they recognize that, and they can hear a song and they're like, oh, that's Steve, you know, I'm thankful for that, because I'm glad I just found my voice, you know, and was able to hone that to my style. Growing up Pentecostal, man, we tent revivals, it was some rockin' southern, you know, that Pentecostal vibe sound, and I like that. So I brought that into, and I never had that with the Anchorman or Gold City until after the Revival album with Gold City. Then I brought that flair, as far as that passion when I sing, to the Revival and the Moment of Truth album. But I've tried to just be like my own style, and so
right.
I'm
I
saying
understand. Yeah. Look, before we get into your newest project, you just had a song recently, a new single released, and your new album coming out. It's a couple more rapid fire questions, just a yes, no, or whatever. You don't have to get drilling it. Are you or are you not your worst critic when you hear your own work?
yes.
Yes. You find flaw in every note that you.
I even singing live, I'll walk off stage and I'll be like, oh, what did I do?
Why did I do this? Why?
Where did I think I was going to go hitting that note, or when I am in the studio, I want to hear the finished product, and then I'll listen to it real thoroughly. But now I'm not a big fan of my voice.
Okay. One more quick one. You've worked with many famous artists, but did you ever have a fanboy moment with one of those artists?
Oh, of course. Michael English, you know, I grew up in a fan of his too, you know. So being in the studio with him, it kind of, you know, you get the pleasantries, and kind of, so the nerves come down a little bit after just talking and hanging out in the studio. But that still, singing in front of him was a big deal to me. Jonathan Cain of Journey, you know, I'm a big Journey fan, and so I was a part of the Bridge Ministry in downtown Nashville there for about 5 years. Candy Christmas, she started that ministry. We fed 500 homeless every Tuesday night under a bridge, had church for them outside, whether it's 2 degrees or 102. We fed them, gave them clothes and non-perishables. And she would also always have someone, once in a while. Amy Grant came out and sang one night. Other people came out. But one night she told me that week before, she said, Jonathan Cain of Journey I met him at this benefit, and he wanted to come and give of his talents to the homeless, and he wants to come. And so she said, but I want you to sing Preach the Word right before he sings. And I'm like, good Lord, no pressure at all to
I
sing
understand. It's,
the Word.
well, superstar status. So she
Yeah.
figured you could handle it. So
I don't know.
we really should work on that. You maybe should, your next album, you should put that on the marquee of the album. That's just saying. I'm just saying.
No.
Yeah, you got to live it, breathe it. What is it? Manifest it. If
Yeah.
you all right. So let's get all that group nonsense out of the way. Now let's talk about Steve Ladd, the solo artist. Tell us about the newest project that it's about to, you said your new album's about to drop. And then just a few days ago, I noticed that you had a new single just came out.
Yes. So I'm working on an EP. My part's done. Background vocals, mixing, mastering, all that extra stuff is being done right now. We're actually in the process of trying to get a special guest to be a part of one particular song, and I'm excited about that. I can't share, but because it's not finalized, and I don't know.
Right. We don't want a name drop. We don't want a name.
So now my last album, Come Up Clean, Jason Crabb was a guest on there with me, and so I'm very proud of that. I think it's really cool. But this one, I'm excited because I have 2 songs that I co-wrote that are going to be on there. And so one called Sometimes the Devil Tells the Truth. And that's a different title for a gospel song.
All right.
So you'll need to look it up. It's on Spotify, Apple.
Yeah, I was thinking to say there'll be some curiosity clicks on that one for sure.
I got the idea from my dad. Someone sent me a video of him preaching at a revival, and just to go back, my dad passed away last April. He came down with leukemia right as I was leaving the old past Anthem edition. He came down, and I'm glad I left at the time I did, because I was able to spend some quality time with Dad. And but he just fought a short battle with leukemia, and so someone had sent me a video of him preaching, and I sat there for an hour and a half, watched it. But he said one little thing that really jumped out to me. He said, the devil won't always lie to you. He said, he'll tell you the truth sometimes. He'll tell you you're not good enough. Well, that's not a lie. Tell you you're not holy enough. None of us are holy enough to deserve Calvary. Ain't got enough money. But he said, but he's leaving out some parts of that story. And so, and I also heard a preacher say one time, he said, part of the truth told as the whole truth is still a lie. And so I wrote the idea down. I just wrote Sometimes the Devil Tells the Truth, and took it to some friends of mine, Kenneth Turner West and Jason Cox, who are 2 of the biggest writers in Christian music, and have had multiple number ones in the Christian music industry. And we wrote that song, and the chorus goes, he ain't wrong when he says we're unworthy. He ain't wrong when he says we're not enough. But he's leaving out the part of the story about a Savior and his love, about a cross and the blood. Part of my singing, I just got back from the doctor. I've been under the
I understand.
But it ties it in, and it's just a different enough title for people to want to listen to it, to be like, God, I got to know what this song is talking about. But it ties it all in. It's just a different title. So I'm excited. That's already out at streaming. Preach the Words at streaming, and my brand new radio single, Everyday Saints, is on streaming. But then the whole album, the whole EP, will come out as an album later on this year. We're looking at hopefully early summer. But Everyday Saints is my new radio single, and it's country. It's a country song, that faith country. Talks about this guy that served in Vietnam. He's traded in all that to help people. Now he goes and does Meals on Wheels on Monday mornings, and sits with a chemo patient on Thursdays watching the chemo drip. And it just talks about his name ain't in the Bible or on the evening news, but if you're wondering about the answer to what would Jesus do, look no further than the portrait of love and grace he paints. He's an ordinary everyday saint. And so second verse talks about a foster care, a woman that fosters children. And, it's just a song that shows the people that you don't have to be in ministry or be in a pulpit or on stage to be to do what God has
right,
helping people, man.
right.
People are falling in love with this song. I think it'll be probably one of my biggest songs to date.
I mean, I can't think of a better way to end it, except I promised you a question that I was going to hit you with. You might not have ever been asked before. You might have. I don't really know.
All right.
If you had, now you, like I said, you're nearly 50 years old now. If you had the opportunity to go back and talk to 10-year-old you, what advice would you give 10-year-old you?
Man. Well, I definitely would let him know that to not be so hard on himself, because I've always struggled with self-complex. I've just, my parents built me up. They were fed into me. They were proud of me. They bragged on me. I should be the biggest big head in the world with a cocky attitude.
Right. Superstar.
How they built me up and bragged on me. I never believed it. Never. I used to sing with my family. I played bass guitar and sang. So I'd sing, the crowd would be there, but I'd look the whole time at my fingers play, and I could not look at the crowd. To this day, there's times I'll be on stage and I'll feel a little anxiety come over me, and like I can't look at people. I have to look at the back wall or over their head. And I would just tell him, that not to let that, because it has affected me at times. There's times I've bombed it, with the groups as a soloist. I bombed because I've let the mind just, this sounds horrible. They're not liking this. And I just go completely off the wall as far as, then I pitch and I crack and I just get inside my head. I would tell him that, but I would also explain to him that, the music business isn't quite how it seems.
It's not as glamorous.
Yes, I'm not talking about it's a bad thing. I'm just talking about, I thought, when I joined the Anchorman, I was 19 years old, still green, but I was old enough but I thought, oh my, if I get this job, I'm gonna be set. They're full time and they were on a bus and they've got charting songs. I thought I was gonna be rolling in it, and then they told me what they could pay, and I accepted it, but it was a rude awakening to that and how the charting system works, and the just everything about music I've had to learn, slowly, and so, but yeah, I would probably tell it, the majority of what I would say is, man, doesn't matter what you look like, doesn't matter how overweight you are, it doesn't matter if your hair don't look good, it doesn't matter, because that's things that, I don't have as nice a suit on as that guy in that group does, or I don't dress, I didn't have the money to, and that bothered me. And to this day, still some of that will creep back in, and it'll start to come up. I've gotten a lot better, and I've learned to, I guess it's age, learn to be, oh well, if I have a bad night, oh well, I'm human. There's always tomorrow night, and so I would tell 10-year-old me just to have more fun and not stress about it.
That's solid advice right there. I wish I could go back and tell my 10-year-old self the same thing. Like, dude, just be, it's going to be all right. I promise.
Be yourself. Don't worry about, about being I've always been a little chunky and had bad skin growing up, and I always worried about that. It always made me, I guess, grow until I got a little older, held me back from probably being a little farther along, because I got just to let it bother me,
Right. So. Little did you know you're going to be the Steve Ladd at this point in your life.
That's it.
All right. So before we get out of here, a couple things. I know it pains me to say this. I would have never had the opportunity to be sitting here speaking to Steve Ladd if it was not for one person. That would happen to be my brother, Chad Walley. So I want to give Chad Walley, my brother, a shout out for putting the two of us together. Because Chad, little did I know that he knew such influential people. So there you go.
I met Chad a few years ago there in Foxworth, Mississippi at First Baptist. And man, he hung out afterwards and talked to us at the table, and
he loves to talk.
Willing to help,
Yeah,
willing to help load out, and do you need anything, you know, and just became a good guy, a good friend. And so matter of fact, before I hadn't even had a chance to contact you, that Sunday night, he gave me your card and said, my brother's got this podcast and he's doing really good, and you need to call him. And so I said, I will. And I had your card sitting on my desk.
Right.
You got it. And you text me that.
Like I said, man, I had no idea. Look, when he meant, I had heard your name before, you know, in the past. The name was familiar. I just couldn't figure out where I knew it from. And he said, yeah, he was with a couple of groups. You know, I think he was with a group like Gold. He was with a group, I think Gold City. I said, Gold City? Dude, that's not just a group. that's a gospel mega group. So anyway, I hate, it pains me to say this, but I'm going to have to thank him for getting us together. I've really enjoyed this conversation. It didn't make me feel quite so old, because a lot of folks you were talking about, I grew up loving listening to. So yeah, there's a lot of days I get up and the knees hurt and I go, man, I'm old and like this. But to hear your story and to hear how it's an American success story is what it is, because you had a dream at 5 years old and you've realized it. So
yeah, that I didn't go to college. I mean, I barely finished school, you know, going from homeschooling to public to back to homeschooling. But I finished school, but I never had a desire ever to do anything other than, number one, be Gold City's tenor, but to also just be in the music business full time. And man, God's been so good. He really has.
All right, brother. Like I said, I can't thank you enough.
Parting shot.
Where I know there's probably one simple location that we can find all your stuff. That's going to be a website. So go ahead and share your website. And for the viewers, I'm going to make sure it's linked in the description below, where you guys can just click and go straight to it and find all his amazing content. So where exactly do they need to go?
SteveLadd.com, LADD, SteveLadd.com. There's links. I've got Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, Twitter, X. All the streaming platforms. Now, listen, before I have CDs of my new album, their songs are being released. 3 of them have already been released to streaming. So any streaming platform, they can hear the 3 latest songs, and then the album will come out later this year.
Sounds great. Look, Steve Ladd, not a Hollywood name. That's his real name, folks. Appreciate you, brother. I can't thank you enough. And I'd love to have you on sometime in the future if you ever had time. You know, I know superstars have big, hefty schedules. I know that. So I feel blessed to be able to talk to you on this episode, but I'd love to have you back later in the future.
Anytime, man. William, thank you for having me on. I appreciate your listeners for listening, and hopefully they have been interested in our conversation.
Man, I hope if they've never heard Steve Ladd, I hope they're introduced to it tonight, and then I hope they go and check out all your content, because you are an amazing vocalist, and I appreciate you being on tonight.
Thank you, William, and thanks to your brother for getting us set up.
That's right. Let's thank him again. All right, guys. We'll see you guys on the next one.